Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. So today we're absolutely honored to have Tim Caswell, one of the most legendary Node.js developers, come and speak with us. I've known Tim for years now, and he inspired me to actually use Node.js. We actually got Tim to come talk to us old school over IRC. So I pinged him over IRC, and I said, hey, we're looking for awesome speakers. I couldn't think of anybody else but you. And he said he'd love to do it. So Tim, if you guys don't know Tim created things we use here at Clevertech, like NVM, which has over 8,000 stars on GitHub. Monthly downloads over 5,000. It's absolutely amazing. Tim's been writing and contributing to Node.js, which we use every day here at Clevertech to help satisfy our clients, since it first came out in 2009. And he's been instrumental in building Connect and Express. He used to work for Sencha. Now he works for Rackspace. And if you guys don't know about Connect and Express, it's the most popular web application framework for Node.js. And I just checked the stats on NPM, and it has over 3.5 million downloads in the past month. And Connect and Express is also which powers Eskimo, which is what we use in all of our internal tools. So every time you go to log time or look at Cleverboard or anything, Tim helped us with the technology and gave it to us for free. So we're really honored to have him here today. And he's going to be speaking to us today with a talk called How He Became Creationix, his life hack. And he's going to share us the story, and he's going to inspire you. So take it away, Tim.
All right, thanks. Oh, all right. I realize that every click forward slides. So thank you for giving me a chance to speak, and that lovely intro. And just let's put credit where credit is due. TJ Holloway-Chuck did most of the work of Express, and I don't maintain NVM anymore, but I create things. I create things and other people maintain them, and it's a really good relationship. It works well. And so I'm going to tell a quick story of how I got into programming, and in particular, certain things that influenced me. And I think, I don't know, my goal here is to show you that anybody can be a creator. I'm just a normal person. I'm from a small town in East Texas. There's nothing special about who I am or where I'm from. So I'm going to start out. I love the year 1982. A lot of cool things happened in that year. The Commodore came out. Many of you probably remember that. Intel made the first of the 86 line of CPUs. This awesome movie Tron came out. If you can see that in the video. And all sorts of cool things. Electronic Arts was founded. Oh, and I was born. So you can do the math. I'm about a third of a century old now. Now, the 80s really, really affected me. So the Commodore 64 was an amazing computer. It had 64 kilobytes of RAM, which in today's standards, that's basically a microcontroller. And it booted up to a basic interpreter. You just turn the computer on, 3 seconds later you're writing code. There is no computer in the world today that you can turn on and be writing code 3 seconds later. As fast as computers are, we don't have that feature anymore. And that's something I miss. And it also had some really cool games. This was one of my favorite games. This was made by Electronic Arts back when they were young. And it's a platform game where you go around and kill monsters and collect keys and go to keyholes. And it had 100 levels, and it had a construction set where you could build your own levels. And so before I could really program much, I loved games where I could build levels through the interface. And making games is kind of like programming. Building levels is kind of like programming. And I started all this when I was in, I don't know, 7 or so, long time ago. I can't remember. And eventually the Commodores died. They were a commercial failure, and we got the PCs. And DOS 5 came with this awesome program called Qbasic. I don't know how many of you remember Qbasic, but I guess this was the precursor to Visual Studio. This was a DOS text-based IDE, had a built-in survival guide. You could write your program, you could see your submodules. There's this little immediate window on the bottom where you could just pause your program, run code, and then resume your program. It was very, very interactive. Just now, browsers are able to do this with JavaScript, maybe in the last 5 or so years. Yet Basic was able to do this a long time ago. So this says 1987 is when this came out. And I programmed Qbasic for about 10 years. It was all I had. There was no web, there was no Stack Overflow, there was no Google or JavaScript or any of that. And so I made Qbasic games. So this Ultimate Wizard game here, this platformer, I made my own version of it in Qbasic. And you can go to my GitHub and you can download the basic file, you can install DOSBox and Qbasic, and you can actually run this game. I took the screenshot yesterday on my MacBook. So I have a MacBook running El Capitan, taking a picture of a game I made in the early 90s. And this is what I did. Programming was a hobby. When most kids were watching TV or playing baseball or playing football, I would go inside and go to the closet, because we had a giant walk-in closet where my computer was, and I would write games and try to convince my siblings to test them for me, because you need beta testers if you're writing games. And that was what I did. And then, as we all know, in the late 90s, the internet was getting more mature, and this thing called the web was created with web browsers. And I learned all that fun technology. IE55 and Netscape were the browsers that I targeted. When Internet Explorer 6 came out, that was the best browser in the world. It was stable, it was fast, it had all these awesome features. And that is why so many of us made apps for it, because it was way better than anything else out there at the time. Unfortunately, 15 years later, there's still some apps written for it, and it's not the best anymore. But, you know, that's life. I guess 20 years ago, this came out in 1995, this version. So I was in high school, and I decided to start my own company. So a couple of my buddies, we made a company called 3sharks.com. And back then, giant splash screens were the thing on websites. So I actually drew this image using some 3D modeling tools. And our company was basically, we would make games in JavaScript and HTML and CSS, and we'd custom make them for whatever the client wanted. If their new website, they wanted some traffic, we could make a game themed around their company's product, their company's web design, and they could have the game on their website. And the idea was the game would bring in traffic, and then once people are there, they would stay and actually buy something. Or that was the business plan. It was a complete and utter failure, like most startups were. But again, as you can see here towards the bottom, I made more platformers and some board games, and I programmed a lot of games, and these were in JavaScript now. I did not use Flash or Java. I believed that the native browser platform was more than enough powerful. Even back in IE55 and Netscape Navigator, it still had enough power to make pretty good games. And then I took a break. So graduated high school, 9/11 happened, and I didn't touch computers for about 2 years. Not because of 9/11, that was just coincidence. But I went and did a service mission for my church where I go out and talk to people about their life and what's important to them. And I was so busy doing that, I did not actually touch a computer for 2 whole years, from about 2001 to 2003. I don't know what happened in the computing world during that time. Some of you will have to fill me in. And while my programming skills may have regressed a little, my social skills took a giant leap, because I was the kind of kid who would, in high school, I would run to the front of the line with my long sleeve shirt and shorts and flip-flops and get my lunch and just put it down as fast as I can and then run to the library and read a book about programming. And the less eye contact, the better. I believe I was diagnosed with Asperger's or something like that at the time. I don't know. But doing this service mission where you basically go out all day and talk to strangers about what matters in their life and what's important will really break you out of that shell. And thanks to that, I'm now able to talk to people. I'm now able to give presentations like this and give talks. And I think that has helped me at least as much as the 15 years as programming as a hobby I did as a kid. So that ended. That's volunteer work. We pay for it, and eventually you run out of money and have to go back home. And so when I got back home, that's when life as an adult started. I had a job at a print shop. I got married. I moved to Arkansas. I know Arkansas, right? Tech Hub. I wrote some Java apps and learned that I really hate that language. Did IT at a bank. Moved back to Texarkana, still on the Arkansas side. Went back to the print shop. My first kid was born, so life is just moving all along. I did IT work for the newspaper. Texarkana is not a big town. There's no programming jobs locally. It's nothing like the bigger cities. There was nothing. There's even nothing there now. So I didn't really have a lot of programming jobs. But then I moved to Dallas because I decided that I should probably get a bachelor's degree in computer science or something. I was a self-taught programmer at this point. I've been programming for about 20 years. I decided I should go to school. And I got a job doing temp work for Robert Half, websites, Linux administration. It paid a little. Dallas isn't that expensive. And yeah. And then I finally got my first real programming job doing Python. And I thought Python was amazing. This was a powerful scripting language. It had all these abilities. I mean, compared to Java of back then, it was way better. And what I really liked about this Python job is I was actually on a team with other programmers. Up until this point, all my programming had been by myself in a silo. And the first 15 years or so, there wasn't even internet. So it was a complete and isolated silo. It was just me and some Commodore magazines my mom had brought me, and then the interactive manual in Qbasic, and that was it. And now I actually had a team with other developers I could talk to and experiences, and that was amazing. I loved that. And then I went to a different job that was PHP, typical web stack, IE6, CSS, JavaScript, the whole 9 yards. Did freelance. Second kid was born. You don't need my full history, but basically I went from work, kid was born, work, finished school. Interesting note, I worked at Document Cloud for all of, I think, 6 weeks, working on this unnamed project that later became Backbone.js. I was really excited at the time. As soon as I finished school, or about the time I finished school, I discovered this project called Node, and this was in 2009. The Chrome browser was starting to become popular, this V8 engine was open sourced, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be awesome if you could use JavaScript on the server side? Because I was using PHP at the time, PHP 4 something. And there were issues with the language. I didn't really like it. And I searched around, and there was V8 CGI and Common.js, and then I found this website for Node. It looked basically like a man page, but it was really well done. And so I joined the mailing list, joined the IRC channel, started contributing, and eventually I created a blog called How to Node, because I was answering the same questions over and over and over on IRC, and I didn't have time for that. I still had kids to take care of. I still had my full-time job. I was still finishing school. I was in my last semester. And so I wrote this to save myself time. But what I did not realize is that no matter how good a programmer you are, the world doesn't know who you are until you publish something. When I put this blog up, suddenly I was instantly Node famous. It was crazy. I went from this nobody in Arkansas, Texas, small town, to companies in California asking me to work for them because I made a blog about how to program with Node, and at the time Node was extremely popular and just growing exponentially. And thanks to my service work, I was able to explain concepts in terms that people understood, and most people liked my writing. So this is when the rise and fall of internet fame happened. So I had packed up my family. There were 4 of us at the time. We just bought 4 one-way tickets on a plane and moved to California. Whatever we could carry in our carry-ons, that was what we brought. The CEO of Sencha showed up at my door and says, "Hey, you want a job working on Node?" I said, "That would be awesome." And so that was the job where I worked with TJ Holowaychuk, and we made Connect, and he was working on Express. And part of my job was to organize meetups and speak at conferences. And it was very easy to get a Node speaking slot because there were all of 10 people in the world who were able to speak about Node. It was still the early days. And so those slots were really easy to get. I flew to Sweden, flew to China, flew to Brazil, like all over the place, speaking at these conferences. because I wasn't working. They saw a family and kids. And so I switched to HP. They were working on this thing called WebOS. It paid a lot more. It was stable, but I was inside the company behind, what do you call it? We were working on products that were secret. We had a strict no leaks policy. You couldn't tell people about the mobile product because the competition, especially Apple, may destroy us. And I didn't have time to go to conferences anymore. And suddenly, nobody knew who I was. Fame is fickle. The Node community has been growing exponentially since 2009. And so if you spend a year not speaking at conferences, then by simple math, over half the people in the community have no idea who you are. And eventually WebOS was shut down by a crazy CEO, and so I moved back to Texas, where things are cheaper. Our third child was born. I was working on some remote jobs. I eventually did a Kickstarter because I just can't stop inventing things. And currently I work for Rackspace and have 4 kids. I have not really given any presentations this year. I think this is my first presentation this year, and we're in October. So in a nutshell, that is my history. Now, what can we learn from that? So I learned that maintaining a work-life balance is essential. Life is not a sprint. Life is a marathon. And I had full-time school, I had full-time job, I have kids to take care of, I had church responsibilities, I had my day job programming, and then I had my hobbies programming. And people often ask me, how in the world do you fit time for all of those? And it takes a little bit of discipline and a lot of, you just have to want to. But some tips. Don't waste time in your commute. And if you're commuting, commute in a way that you can work while commuting. When I was in California, I loved Caltrain because I could bring my laptop and work on the train, except internet was crap. But if you worked offline, it worked well. I work from home whenever possible because then you have zero commute. When you do work from home, you need to set office hours. Otherwise, you'll find that your work and your home just blend and life becomes a blur and suddenly you're not productive anymore and all your time is gone. You have to stay at top productivity or you waste your time. Time is a precious resource. If you have a job that gives you vacation, use it wisely so that you don't get burned out. Limit your travel. I love going to conferences. I could go to every JS conf there was. It would be so much travel and it would cramp into my other time. I'd have to make up the work and don't do everything. And continue your hobbies. My hobbies are creating things, programming. I make board games. I create things out of wood. I don't know if you can see this office, but I basically built this building. That's a bed up there. And yeah, so making things out of wood is a hobby. Continue going to church or whatever community thing you like. Talk to other humans. Don't just live on the computer. As far as home life, I have a few chores that I do to help out. I wash all the dishes. I do most of the yard work. I make sure to play with the kids at least an hour or two every day. I help with breakfast. I help tuck the kids in. And that takes a lot of time. Being a parent is a lot of work. Those of you who have kids know what I mean. And so most of my hobby hacking, where I create things that aren't my job, are done at night after the kids go to bed, in the dark, just sitting in bed programming. But don't do that every night. I can stay up and work till 3 a.m. a couple nights in a row when I'm feeling really productive. But once you start getting sleep deprived, you just lose. And it's best to catch up on sleep. These last 2 tips, you don't have to maintain every open source project you release. If you do, you will quickly be limited into what you can create to your first 2 or 3 successful projects. The NVM project that was mentioned is by far my most popular project. I mean, I think I get 20 emails a day based on it. And so Jordan has taken over maintenance of that, and that saves me untold amount of time. I just look at the emails, I'm like, he can manage them, and I mark them as read. And he loves maintaining the project. He's very happy to do it. So it works for me, works for him. You don't have to maintain personally every project you start. And also, always, always, always learn. I was working on this talk yesterday, and I was kind of surprised that back in '95 we had web browsers. We had JavaScript. I think that's when the language was made. And here we are 20 years later, and we've progressed, but nothing really fundamental has changed. Whereas back in the early 80s, if you look at the history, every single year something amazing has changed. The world today is shifting away from becoming learners into becoming mindless consumers. And I'm trying really hard to fight that. One of my hobbies is trying to create programs to teach kids to be makers again, and not just mindless consumers. So as a developer, don't just go to work and then go home and never think about it again. Or if your job lets you, learn on the job. A lot of jobs will allow that. But always, always learn new technologies, do things that are interesting and fun, keep your brain active. I was asked to mention what tools I use to get my work done. I've used a ton of tools. The main theme is I keep them simple. I have a text editor with syntax highlighting and a terminal. And that's my favorite work environment. The only IDE I used was the DOS Qbasic because that's all there was back then. It was not a multitasking OS. You couldn't have two apps side by side. But ever since then, I've just used a text editor and a terminal. I prefer Linux, although Macs aren't bad. They both have good terminals. I use iTerm on Mac, GNOME on Linux. My current editor is Atom. I've used Sublime, TextMate, I use Vim. In the Linux days, I used gedit for a long time. But like I said, the important thing is just a linter to help let the computer do some checking for you. I usually do scripting languages, so there's not a lot of static checking, but linters can do a bit. And that's basically my tools. As far as what I test on everything. I do web development in all the browsers. I have all the operating systems. I have a couple Chromebooks I bought over the years for testing Chrome OS, laptops, desktops, tablets, phones, Raspberry Pis, Arduinos, you name it, I've probably got it somewhere in my office. And lately I've been getting into microcontrollers and 3D printers because they're really fun. It's a mix of software and hardware. They're really simple. A microcontroller does not have an operating system. The code you write is what runs on the hardware directly. And I find that amazing. 3D printers are frustrating and fun. They allow you to do things, but they also break constantly. I have no idea how I'm doing on time. Hopefully I'm about right. So this is my current project. When I was at HP working on WebOS, we had Node actually running in the tablets, in the touchpad, in the Palm phones. And Node uses V8, as you know. V8 eats a lot of RAM. Google, when they wrote V8, heavily optimized it to save CPU at the expense of RAM. Because you know in computer science there's that trade-off. V8 eats a lot of RAM, which was a problem on these little ARM system-on-a-chip computers. It would take literally 2,000 to 3,000 milliseconds for your Node service to boot up. And in the meantime, the user using the app says, I want to open my contacts app. What is this 3-second delay loading my list of contacts? And so I re-implemented Node on top of Lua because the Lua language is super similar to JavaScript. The VM is much, much lighter weight. It uses about 20 times less RAM, boots up instantly. On the touchpad, I could start that up in 100 milliseconds instead of 3,000. Small enough that you didn't notice. And, well, HP, WebOS, that went under. They never used it. They never cared. So that, oh, I went back a bunch. So that was my hobby. And Rackspace, the hosting company, they were looking for something that was like Node, but lighter weight. And they basically took over maintenance and love it for me. So again, I made something, someone else took over, and they maintained it, and I moved on to JSGit and trying to make new languages and freelance, and other things I listed in my history. But then recently, about a year ago, I got tired of freelance because when you have a family, it's really stressful if you have no income for 5 months, which happens sometimes. And Rackspace came up to me and they said, hey, would you like to work on Loveit for your day job? And so they hired me as a salaried employee to work on Loveit and the related technologies in their stack that use Loveit. And so that's my full-time job. I've been there about a year. We completely redid the project, I re-implemented it from scratch, redid the website, and that's my current day job. I made possibly 300 plus projects on GitHub, and one of them got me a day job. So your mileage may vary, but if you want to work full-time in open source, create things that you like in your free time. They can help your employer, they can help you, they can help other people. But always, always be creating. So if I can tell you anything, creation is your opportunity in this life. Every human being has the potential to create. That's what differs us from the computers. Computers just follow instructions. They can only do what they're told. Even artificial intelligence is just really, really advanced algorithms for doing what they've already been told. But humans, we can create things. That's what makes us unique, so do that. And my username, CreationX, is I took creation and then added IX from Linux and Unix because I love open source. So what I do is I create things in open source. That's my hobby, that's my passion. I will literally feel sick if I go a week without writing some open source code. I don't know what it is about me. I just have to write code and give it away. GitHub's been amazing. I love GitHub because I can write it and post it and anyone can use it. They can favorite it. They can file issues. And that saved me a ton of frustration, I'm sure. So I guess in closing, I'll ask you a rhetorical question. What will you create? Think about when you look back on the last 20 years of your life, what will you want to have done? And I'm sure there's things that I could have done better, but I'm glad that I spent so much time creating. So that's the end of my slides. Do we do Q&A now?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. That was absolutely phenomenal. That was amazing, inspirational. And just everyone else here at Clevertech, just want you to think about how Tim fits so nicely with the purpose we've heard from Kuti over the past Clever Fridays about mastery and purpose of your craft. And everything that Tim talked to us about is just so relevant with that. So we'll open it up to questions now. And anybody feel free to chime in or raise your hand. Or ping me in Slack if you want to talk, and I'll just point out your name. So if anybody wants to go ahead first.
Yeah, I got one from here. Tim, very pleased to meet you. First of all, really nice talk. I really enjoy it. I let you know that you inspire me to a lot of things. I've been in open source for a few years, but this is a whole new level. Meeting someone who has major contributions to the community is really awesome. I want to congratulate you for that. And I have 4 questions. I know they're a little bit technical and JS related, but I wanted to shoot it out. The first one is, what do you like the most and least about ES6?
ES6, that's a great question. I love generators. One of the things that I've been experimenting with and pioneering in the last few years is a way to do blocking I/O in Node. Node is great, the callbacks suck. Anyone writing large logic-heavy code knows that it gets really painful. And I do callbacks as good as anyone, and it's still painful. With generators, you can actually block your code, wait for a result, and then resume your code. And in ES7, they've actually codified the techniques that I pioneered as async await. And so I'm really excited about that. I'm not excited about promises. I was promoting something called continuations that were much, much simpler, but no, they went for the promises A+ spec, which is huge. And whatever, it is what it is. I'll accept it. And if I don't like it, I'll just make my own language. That's the way I feel about it. If I don't like it, I'll just make something else. There is nothing that we as programmers cannot create. C is really easy to learn for simple things. And with enough practice, you can create your own VMs, your own languages. You can even make your own JIT after a couple of years if you work at it. It's not that hard. People think it's black magic. It's not. But yeah, that's my favorite, least favorite is generators and promises.
Perfect. The second one, and I think the final one, to keep everyone has the chance to ask you things, is: would you prefer ES6 related? Do you prefer class syntax or prototypal inheritance? I have read other places where people have taken bans or sites about that.
My opinion is object-oriented programming in general has been done wrong for the past decade. We've focused on objects and inheritance and classes when the purpose of object-oriented programming was simply to organize your thoughts in the terms of objects and methods. But all the focus is on inheritance. I don't like inheritance. Inheritance is almost always the wrong answer. If you're going to do it, the prototypal is simpler, and I generally prefer simpler. But if you're going to if it's JavaScript, you're pretty much stuck with constructors or classes. And if you're going to do that, the class syntax is cleaner. But if you're using any of the built-ins or any third-party libraries, you're going to have to use constructors. When I write my own JavaScript, I use closures. And I use local variables as my properties, and then return objects full of functions as my methods. And I much prefer that style.
Okay.
So next, anybody feel free to chime in.
Thank you.
Hey, Tim. Great talk. Thanks very much. It was really inspiring. I was wondering if you could speak to I find a balance needs to be, I need to find a balance between, I guess, self-promotion and making things that are small and niche versus things that apply to people. Like, I've made a ton of stuff, and I don't want to like annoy people with chatting about it all the time, but how do you get people to find it?
Great question. Sounds like two questions. I'll do the second one first. How do you promote your projects? Well, first, you got to release the source. That will do wonders. If people can look at your code, try it out. Documentation. I have found that if I don't document a project, no matter how amazing it is, no one will care. When I first made Levitt, it was basically Node, but technically superior in every way possible, except that it's a different language. People really like JavaScript. I don't know why. But I didn't document it well, and it was a complete and utter failure. I even went to JS. I even went to NodeConf, gave the keynote talk, this big talk about Levitt. I said, hey, here's Node, but you have coroutines you can block. It uses less memory. It's faster. No one cared. Whereas when I take the time to document something, write blog posts about it, explaining it, and it takes off. So put yourself in the shoes of the person who might be using your project. Would you touch a project that you don't know how to use? You wouldn't. Now, your other question, I mean, as far as actual promotion, I use Twitter. I will mention people in IRC occasionally, not too much. There's mailing list, and you can even get blog posts on other blogs. I got a ton of traffic when Read Write Web, that's tongue twister. When they featured How to Node, I had my analytics and it just spiked. So sometimes partnerships help, but if you don't have something written for them to share, they won't share anything. They're not just going to link to an undocumented GitHub because no one cares.
Thanks.
As far as practical versus fun, I guess that's the question. I mean,
yeah. Basically, the idea is, stuff that I find very useful that I use over and over again. It doesn't seem like it matters to anybody else, and I guess that's okay. I mean, I'm not looking for other people to, say, hey, this is really great. But how do I make things, I guess, more applicable to others?
That's what every product manager wants to know. I've studied a lot of this. My undergrad was actually software engineering, unfortunately, but I learned a lot of this. There's this false idea that there's the average consumer, the average user, that's the average of everybody. And if you target them, then most people will like your product. That is absolutely not true. There's no such person. Every person has unique quirks. And so if you target a person that doesn't exist, nobody's happy. Now, if you target someone that's a little more real, has a little more quirks, and at least if they love it, at least one person will love the thing you make, and others may like it. I just make tons of projects. Like I said, I have hundreds of projects on GitHub. I make things that I like, or maybe someone will ask me something they want, and I'll just make it, try it, get a proof of concept out the door. And if no one cares, I move on. Because you don't know what people want. I mean, everyone is trying to figure out what is the next thing that everybody likes, and that's a hard question. So I wouldn't worry about trying to please others unless someone concretely says, hey, I have this problem. Could you solve it? But trying to guess problems people might have is just a waste of time, I believe. I don't know if that helps.
Yep, thanks.
Anybody else have a question?
Hey, I was meaning to ask, do you use any productive technique like Commodore or plain time boxing to accomplish what you do?
I never have been able to do it. I've tried I think I heard you right, like techniques for managing your time. I mean,
Yeah. Techniques for managing your time or managing your focus, or simply scheduling the tasks in a way that you can accomplish more without so many work.
Right. The time management techniques, none of those have really worked for me. I tried the Pomodoro and some others, and I don't have the discipline for it because my productivity is so up and down throughout the day. I've just tried to pay attention, and when I'm productive, work, and when I'm not productive, go do something else. Like, okay, it's time to go mow the lawn. I can't think. I'll go because that needs to get done. Or go play with some kids. I hear them screaming even though I'm not even in the house. They probably need some help. A lot of it you'll just gain through intuition, through experience. That's, I think, the most valuable thing I learned from my programming as a kid is I now have 15 years of programming experience that I can draw on just for intuition. And that's really hard to explain. But like you see these problems, you see these patterns, and it's different languages, different algorithms, but there's some things you get a feel for, I probably shouldn't spend any more time on this. Just, I don't know, I'm sorry, I can't explain it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Tim. Next question. Anybody else?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for sharing. You're very generous, and it's very inspiring to hear you. And I would like to know your take on the new versions of JavaScript, because it seems like they are taking some ideas from functional programming, and I would love to hear from you what's your take on that, and even if you know or have heard about Clojure going to next stream into functional programming with JavaScript. Thanks.
Okay. So I actually like functional programming, at least parts of it. I love, like I mentioned before, I love closures. I much prefer that over mutable objects. Mm-hmm. I don't go hardcore Haskell, everything's immutable, use monads for side effects. That's too much for me. But I love a lot of the ideas. Mm-hmm. I love the composition, and that's how I tend to write my JavaScript. I think ClojureScript is great. I haven't used it for much, but it sounds like a really good idea. There's a few others I've been looking at. FunScript is one I discovered recently. It's F#. It compiles to JavaScript. So you get the type inference from the OCaml F# family, but it's a scripting language that runs in the browser. The language itself has some of that adding, but it looks to me like they're more moving towards a Java-like object system. I don't know. What I'm really, really excited for is WebAssembly, because I believe that if that's done right, that will allow us to create whatever language we want and run it in the browser without a ton of penalty. Because right now I can make languages and run them in the browser, but they're going to be several magnitudes slower than the JavaScript. But I think WebAssembly will close that gap and we won't be forced to use JavaScript anymore. So I'm really excited about that because that'll open up all sorts of things.
Great, thanks.
Okay, we'll take one more question here. Anybody wants to chime in, go for it.
Yeah, Tim, I'll ask you a quick question. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It's a story that I myself can personally relate to quite a lot. So Nick was right when he said that you'd inspire myself. I guess what I want to ask you is some of your bigger creations that you're working on that would involve maybe more time in the development phases, etc. With the distractions of life and the work-life balance that you're trying to maintain, how do you keep your motivation to see your project through, get them across the finish line?
That's hard for me. I usually don't, because like you say, there's distractions, and if it's just a hobby and I'm doing it because it makes me feel good, when it reaches a point where I don't feel good and no one has shown any interest in it, I drop the project. 99% of them are unfinished. Things that motivate me, if people are interested in it, that motivates me because, oh, look, I actually have someone who cares. I did a Kickstarter for JSGit, and that one had a bit of interest. Plus, I'd made this promise to the Kickstarter backers I'd make this thing. And that was more of an obligation motivation, but that's motivation too. There were days where I'd rather do something else than work on that, but I worked on it anyway because I had an obligation to the backers. If you can find something that you're interested in and people need, that's the easiest. Because you'll want to work on it most of the time, and people will be asking you questions. And if someone has a need for it, I think that's the biggest motivator. And honestly, if no one has a need for the thing you're making and you're not interested anymore, what's the point? I think it's okay to drop it at that point. I get a lot of flack for not finishing things, but I don't care.
Well, Tim, I just wanted to say we've got probably 47 people here that work almost every day using tools and things that you've created or worked with. And I just want to say keep up the good work because we think it's great. It's fantastic.
Thanks. And if there's any of my projects that you have an issue with, please communicate. File an issue, let me know. And because I focus my time on where people get feedback. A project might be dead for 2 years. If someone files a GitHub issue, I'll pick it up again. So I focus my time based on what people care about.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. And I just have a question for you. When can you come speak to us again? When you're working on something amazing again? Another awesome project. Maybe we're using Loveit.
Maybe. Loveit's cool. I'm also working on a couple of hobby projects. I'm making a language for kids for microcontrollers. I'm trying to get them by Christmas. We'll see. And yeah, maybe when one of those is done, I could demo it or something.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. I'm going to hand it over to Kuti here for some closing words.
All right, Tim, thanks so much. I think it's a pretty unique as a fully remote company. We've got around 100 people around the world, and for them to, as you say, so easily without a commute, be able to sit in front of them for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I think that's the wave of the future, and how teams are getting organized in order to deliver an insane amount of value. And I very much appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom here. Of course, you're welcome back anytime. And I actually got some interesting insight. I didn't realize you were creating games. There might be some interesting opportunities there. And kids and microcontrollers is certainly the wave of the future. I've got there's a lot of people who are talking about that, and so having insight there, I think, is also ways for us to be able to try and help promote things that are on your agenda, which I think is the whole purpose, right? Everything that we're doing here and everything we do with our clients is all in the effort to be creators in the world and try to make all of our lives better. And that's what we're all doing here. So I'm really excited. Thank you so much for spending the time with us this Friday. I hope everybody here at Clevertech took away something from this, got a little inspired. Think about it over the weekend and see how it is that you can take it home and make something that the world hasn't seen yet. So thanks so much. Have a great weekend, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thanks.